nice turnout.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
new
did
members
well.
are great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here for our conversation marking the 15th anniversary of the Supreme Court's disastrous Citizens United decision, which, as I think everyone here knows, permits corporate special interests to spend unlimited, often undisclosed money to influence our votes and our government. And the decision lets the wealthy, well-off, and well-connected to drown out the voices of everyone else. I'm going to have some remarks, but before I do that, I want to thank Durf Johnson and Tiffany Muller, who many of you know. And I think before I speak, I think what I'd like to do, and I'm so grateful for so many people being here, and thanks for people who are observing online for being here in recognition of this day. And before I begin, I'll just ask people quickly to go around the room, since we have, and I'm grateful for, all the members of the freshman class, which is a distinguished group, for being here. But since some of them may be unknown to some of the folks who are watching and others who are gathered, I'm going to ask, with my starting with my dear friend, the distinguished chair of the Rules Committee, now the ranking member, soon to be Rules Committee chair, once again, Jim McGovern, just to introduce yourself and your district and the state that you represent.
So, for a while, okay. I'm Jim McGovern. I represent the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts. The major city is Worcester, which a lot of the people who call my office can't pronounce, so I know they're not from my district. So it's a good place to represent. But in any event, I'm grateful to be here with all of you.
Thank you. Beck.
I am Congresswoman Becca Ballant. I represent all of Vermont. Vermont only gets one rep. I'm it. Happy to be here.
And we're grateful for that.
Hi, everyone. Maggie Goodlander from New Hampshire. I've got 2 great neighbors, Becca and Jim, and really grateful to be here today.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Gil Cisneros. I represent California's 31st Congressional District in the San Gabriel Valley in Los Angeles County. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Congressman George Whitesides from the north side of LA County, representing Santa Clarita, Lancaster, and Palmdale.
Good afternoon, folks. Andrea Salinas from Oregon's Willamette Valley, the 6th District, 2nd-term member. Very happy to be here.
Hey, Kristen McDonald-Rivet. I am from Michigan, very proudly representing the cities of Flint, Saginaw, Bay City, and Midland, and the awesome, basically, farms that connect them.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Johnson. I'm from Texas 32, right in Dallas, Texas.
Hi there, I'm Emily Randall from Washington State's 6th District. That's all of the Olympic and Kitsap Peninsulas and the city of Tacoma.
Chris DeLuzio, Pennsylvania's 17th District, southwestern Pennsylvania.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah McBride. I also represent the entirety of a state, in this case, the greatest state in the Union, Delaware. I somehow find myself sandwiched in Pennsylvania, but like my state did 200 years ago, I'll break free of their tyrannical yoke. And most importantly for this, I am Tiffany Muller's former intern.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Summer Lee, representing Pennsylvania's 12th Congressional District, a district I think that is larger in size than all of Sarah's state. But I represent the entirety of the city of Pittsburgh and other parts all around Chris DeLuzio.
I don't know, Jamie. Wherever Jamie Fleet is, I think we're going to need to do some restoration, reconciliation, HR stuff among members. Because I'm Delia Ramirez, I represent Illinois 3rd, more importantly, the greatest city in the entire country, Chicago. And so fight me on it. I'm kidding. And let me wrap up in saying that Tiffany doesn't know this, but before I went into elected office, I got to serve as a campaign manager for Common Cause Illinois. So big money in politics is something that I think about often, and I look forward to the conversation.
John Mannion, New York 22, Central New York and parts of the Mohawk Valley. Biggest cities are Syracuse and Utica.
Go Jenny Cream Ale.
It's a little over here.
Suhas Subramaniam, represent
Chair
Virginia's
Morelle.
10th District, Northern Virginia.
But as you'll note, this is a full contact sport here. We're also joined to my right, our dear friend Virginia K. Solomon from Common Cause. And so thank you all for being here. As I said, democracy, our access to the ballot, the ability to run for office, our ability to hold those of us in elective office and other people in politics accountable has undermined by Citizens United. And worse yet, the tidal wave of dark money unleashed by Citizens United impacts the most significant challenges our country faces. For example, dark money perpetuates,
I mean, both,
yeah,
really.
both. Actually, that's true. The climate crisis, causing significant and lasting damage to our environment, raising the cost of everyday goods that Americans need to survive. And we've seen this repeatedly in Ohio, for example. Electric utility used dark money to cause state house lawmakers to ensure passage of a bill which bailed out the coal and nuclear plants while rolling back clean energy standards. In Florida, another utility spent $200,000 in dark money to ensure the victory of a Republican state senator to help the utility push for rate increases for residential customers. Arizona Power Company gave $10.7 million to dark money groups to elect 2 Republican commissioners who then supported the utility company's request for a $95 million increase in utility bills. I mean, the list goes on, and corporate interests are not spending money to help Americans. When they win, typically it drives up costs and people pay more. You know, the other thing, and we talked about this pretty extensively in the last session, in the last Congress, the impact on dark money on reproductive rights. And starting in the mid-'70s, the anti-abortion movement fought to gain political power by championing campaign finance laws that benefited them. They knew they didn't have the people on their side. They continue to not have the people and the public on their side, but they continue to manage to use money in ways that it's not intended. And Citizens United was the culmination of that effort. And in doing that, have ultimately captured the Supreme Court, paving the way for the Dobbs decision. So much harm has been done by Citizens United, I think in many ways beyond what many of us thought was going to happen when the decision came out, as horrific as it was. What adds and compounds the problem is the Federal Election Commission, which has been gripped by disagreement and deadlock. Since Citizens United opened the door for super PACs, dark money, unlimited contributions, the FEC has failed time and time again to act. President Trump was remarkably 56-0 in matters before the FEC for violations, suggested violations of campaign finance law. Of the 56 cases, the nonpartisan career staff recommended commissioners find reason to believe that the Trump political organizations had violated the law in 26 of them. And again, in all 26, the Republican commissioners voted down those recommendations. So where did it leave us? Where does it leave us? Former Justice Louis Brandeis said, "We must make our choice. We may have democracy or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of few, but we can't have both." And I was reminded of that sitting in the rotunda yesterday, witnessing not only the inauguration of President Trump, but the gathered number of billionaires there who have paid homage and are spending more and more money. The notion that Elon Musk could write a $277 million worth of checks to the and coordinate with the Trump campaign is something that even Citizens United's justices in their ruling didn't anticipate. But boy, when people use the word oligarchy in America, boy, yesterday was a portrait of that on display, and none have the courage apparently to speak up. So question before us is, what do we do in the disclosure laws? We need to put the FEC as an actual cop on the beat, and we need a comprehensive set of reforms to ensure every eligible American has access to the ballot, votes for candidates running under fair maps, And that's why we're all pursuing, and thank you, so many of you have participated in the Freedom to Vote Act and the work that's been done, and I can't thank the folks up here enough for the incredible work that they have done. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and I'm going to start to my right, move left, if that's okay. Are you ready to go, Virginia?
Ready to go.
So Virginia K. Solomon from Common Cause.
Thanks. Good to meet all of you, for those of you who I have not met before. Again, my name is Virginia K. Solomon. I am the president and CEO of Common Cause. We are a national pro-democracy and civil rights organization founded in 1970. We have over 1.5 million members across the country, and we have 30 state offices throughout this country as well. So we are both operating at the state and the federal level. And we've been able to pass hundreds of pro-democracy reforms at the national, state, and local level, I would add. First, Congressman Morelle, I just want to thank you for inviting me. He's a friend, and so it's always good to be in company of friends, but a real champion for democracy. I also want to apologize for being late. For an inauguration that was not outside, there sure are still a lot of street closures going on out there. But just for your incredible leadership, and also all of you for taking the time here today as you work to strengthen democracy and get some of this big secret money out of here. And it's a problem, right? We have billions of dollars that are being spent. I just want to note that since the Citizens United decision happened, they have spent now 13 times the amount per this election. There was 13 times the amount spent than has ever been spent prior to this decision happening. And with all of that money being spent, it's no wonder that you have people who are, nurses, teachers, firefighters, everyday Americans who are running for office and just simply can't compete or who have opted out. Most Americans, and especially in the conversations that I'm having with people around the country, they're just saying, why should I bother? I can never raise the amount of money that I need to raise to be able to win a race. And I'm sure that holds true for many of you as you think about that. And it's just such a huge barrier to the entry point. And compound that with being a person who may have a marginalized identity and the disproportionate impact that it has on LGBTQ folks, women, especially working women and mothers. When you think about Black and brown communities who already aren't getting the resources to be able to compete, it makes it even harder. And most people already don't feel like they have a voice in our government. The reality is that most people say, how am I going to be able to run if I can't afford to hire a lobbyist? I don't have a super PAC behind me. I don't know rich people. I don't know those people. And meanwhile, President Trump has essentially created what we've called an oligarchy by choosing Elon Musk and many, many others, especially those out-of-touch billionaires who have never had to understand what it is to be a wait person or be a bartender or a supermarket clerk. Those are the people that he is not only choosing for his cabinet, but the people who have backed his campaign. And I want to just say something really quickly that I think is important, because it's not just about the dark money. It's what I'd like to say, the in-kind contributions. We can't forget about what the contribution was of Elon Musk and X and the changes in the algorithm and these other things. So it goes far beyond just those tangible dollars. It's about the access that those corporations have and the ability to manipulate the information that we consume. I think that to ensure that big secret money can't keep calling the shots, we need to be able to give everyday Americans a greater voice in our government and a greater voice in our elections. And nobody here needs a refresher on the awful Citizens United decision, so I want to just focus a little bit on the harm that has come to everyday people. Everything from clean water, air, safe food, we all deserve those things. But big polluters, greedy corporations continue to funnel dark money to Republicans more often than many of you, who do their bidding to get rid of environmental safety measures, food safety, and drive up costs to make things more expensive for all of us. And I want to highlight an example from Florida from several years ago involving the multi-billion-dollar utility company Florida Power and Light. In 2018, Florida Power and Light secretly established a nonprofit and funneled $200,000 in dark money through it to ensure the victory of a Republican state senator who would help that utility, I quote, maintain its grip on the solar energy market, snap up a public utility in Jacksonville, and push for rate increases on residential customers. Except for a whistleblower who leaked documents to the press, no one would have known that Florida Power and Light had spent significant dark money to manipulate a state election in favor of Republicans. Voters were left completely in the dark about who was trying to influence their voices and their votes, while Florida Power and Light was simultaneously trying to raise the cost of electricity for consumers. So to counteract scandals like this, we need common sense reforms, like the Freedom to Vote Act and the Disclose Act, to prevent Florida Power and Light and other big corporations from secretly trying to manipulate elections and stop them from driving the cost up for all of us. And I think reinforcing there are solutions. And I know many of you have come into this Congress feeling probably a little bit defeated. As somebody who is an activist and somebody who cares very much and somebody who is a student of the civil rights movement, I want to remind you, Dr. Dorothy Height was a founding board member of my organization. And she has a famous quote that said, "If the time is not ripe, we ripen the time." This is your opportunity to ripen the time. I want to give big kudos to House Democrats for advancing the Disclose Act, which did pass the House 3 times in recent years, 3, as part of the For the People Act and the Freedom to Vote Act, and small donor matching fund systems to help get big money out of politics. However, these efforts were repeatedly blocked by Senate Republicans, as you all may know. And the fight is more than just getting big money out of politics and stopping corporate greed and special interests. As I mentioned before, there are a lot of in-kind contributions that are happening that aren't even measured, and I think we will continue to see this in the coming months and years ahead when we look at who controls the media, who controls the algorithm, who controls the social media. I was likening this the other day to blood diamonds. Every single American now is a diamond in the mine. They control the information that we consume. They control the decisions that we make through their algorithms, things we purchase, and the politics that we decide on. And we human beings, every single person in this country, is giving that information, and it is no different than a utility that is required. We need access to these things just for our everyday lives at this point. And who is controlling at the top is making those decisions. And so it's for us all to be able to look more deeply into that and the regulation around that as well. But I can say that we in this fight at Common Cause and organizations like our friends at End Citizens United, we're in this fight to ensure that we can all say no to big corporations that are trying to buy influence with legislators. We're in this fight to ensure that everybody can stand up to big pharma when they're pushing up the costs. And we are in this fight to make sure that every person in this country has a voice, and that their voice and their vote is taken seriously, and that dollars, it's every vote, every voice, not every dollar, every vote. We've been doing this for more than 50 years at Common Cause, and we will do this as long as it takes for every person to have their voice heard. Again, I thank you for letting me speak today, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Virginia. Before I call on Tiffany, I just want to acknowledge George Latimer from New York's 16th District, which is the counties of Westchester and the Bronx, has joined us as well. Look, I know people have to come in and out, so I do appreciate everybody being here. And let me turn it over now to Tiffany Muller, one of the first people I met when I came to Washington. I don't know if you know that, but who is
I'm
really...
sorry.
No, are you kidding? That was a highlight, man. But she has led End Citizens United, which seeks to overturn that awful decision, end unlimited and undisclosed money, and is a great friend. So, Tiffany, take it away. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ranking Member Morelle, for gathering all of us for this critical discussion on this anniversary. I'm only going to put that in quotes. And it's so great to be here with all of you. Congresswoman McBride, if you need an intern, I am ready to sign up. I'm sure that you will be a better boss than I was at the time, but it is wonderful to be here with all of you. And thank you to all of you who have been talking about the dangers to our democracy, the dangers that money in politics plays, and the real direct harms that people are facing every single day across the country and in your districts. It's a real pleasure to partner with you in those efforts, and I look forward to continuing to do so. To Congressman McGovern, thank you for your leadership on trying to overturn this horrific decision and for your leadership day in and day out on these issues. And it's always wonderful to be with my amazing partners. So, I'm Tiffany Muller, president of In Citizens United, and as the congressman said, we are an organization made up of 4 million members across the country, dedicated to getting big money out of politics and cleaning up the corruption. And yes, we want to actually do what our name says. We want to overturn Citizens United. And, you know, a lot of times when we start to talk about Citizens United, it can start to make people's eyes glaze over, right? Like, oh, we're going to talk about a Supreme Court case. It can become pretty obscure sounding. Or when we start to talk about the sheer amount of money that's been spent in our elections since that horrendous decision, it can feel a little inaccessible to people, right? Think about it. Just this cycle, there was almost $17 billion spent in our elections in 2024. $17 billion. That number is astounding, right? But it's also hard to break it down for what it means for everyday Americans. And I think that's one of the things that we really want to spend more time talking about, is how this disastrous decision didn't just open the floodgates to unlimited money and undisclosed spending, but it shut the door to actually getting anything done, right? It shut the door on passing real climate change legislation, despite the fact that before the Citizens United decision, there were 14 instances of Republicans joining with Democrats to try to address the effects of climate change. We were one vote away from passing cap and trade at the time. And then Citizens United happened. The oil and gas lobby became the #1 spender in elections, and there have been exactly 0 instances of us being able to address that since. Right? Before Citizens United, we were actually able to have real meaningful conversations about ways to address the cost of prescription drugs. Now, Big Pharma spends $300 million every election cycle and puts 1,500 lobbyists up on Capitol Hill every single day. 1,500. 3 for every one of you. And then they expect us to think that our voices matter the same. Right? And we see what happens when you have an executive order that was just signed trying to take away the very negotiations that you all worked so hard to bring real relief to the American people. Or, the ravaging of gun violence in our country and in our communities, and how the gun lobby and the NRA continues to spend tens of millions of dollars to make sure that there's no progress on that. Only thoughts and prayers. And it's happening on the state level too, as you heard, with the Florida Power and Light example, with Ohio Energy, where, again, First Energy paid $60 million, $60 million, to get a $1.3 billion bailout, the largest pay-to-pay corruption scandal in that state's history. These are the things that are regularly happening. So it's really no wonder that 75% of Americans think, doesn't matter what party, think our country is right now on the wrong track. And it shouldn't surprise any of us when they think that their voices don't matter. Because honestly, they're right. They are being so drowned out, and we are seeing it. And yesterday's inauguration, we're seeing kind of the full consequences of the last 15 years come to pass. When we have what I like to call the start of the billionaires' ball, right? And in the 2024 election, I promise I will not bore you with too many numbers, but a few I think are important. Just 7 people, 7 mega donors, donated $1 billion to elect Donald Trump. Just 7 people. That's not the way that one vote, one voice is supposed to work in this country. Some of those wealthy donors who spent more than $300 million are now being placed in charge of the very government agencies that they have business in front of, like Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz, who made a fortune as a snake oil salesman and has at least $33 million in stock in 3 companies with business before CMS, the very organization that he is going to oversee. How about the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent? And I apologize if I said his last name wrong. So he's a hedge fund manager who's made a lot of money on betting on currency values across the world. He currently has $150 million in open positions on the value of the dollar. He's going to become Treasury Secretary, where his decisions are going to absolutely impact the value of our dollar. And he's got $150 million riding on it. We could keep going down the line, but I was told I can't go through every single example because it turns out there are a lot of them. This is no longer just pay for access. This is pay to get the readout, the policies they want, and to line their own pockets at the expense of everyone else. And it's paying off already. Just since the election, we saw the wealth of the 10 richest people in the world surge by $64 billion the day after Trump was elected. $64 billion in one day. Elon Musk's net worth has increased by $200 billion just this year, with the vast majority of that coming just since the election, right? So, we know what we are up against. We know that this is causing direct harms to people every single day. We know that they feel it, and so we have to be super clear about calling it out and making sure that we have a real platform for reform and how we're going to do that. And so first, I thank all of you for already being in favor of so much of this, overturning Citizens United. We have to do that. We have to either pass a constitutional amendment or we have to get a majority on the Supreme Court that will overturn that disastrous decision. But we all know that's no easy feat. I call it job security where I'm at. But there are lots of pieces of legislation that we know we can pass, like the Freedom to Vote Act, that would clean up the dark money and make sure we had disclosure and transparency, that would clean up the corruption and make sure we had a cop on the beat in a real working Federal Elections Commission. And we have to continue to call out every instance of this corruption and to be very clear about who is working for the American people and who's just working for themselves. We're grateful to partner with all of you in those efforts, and thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. I do want to break it down to the state level, and I want to introduce Durf Johnson, who's the Deputy Director of Montana Environmental Information Center, a native Montanan who has testified in front of our committee, and I'm just going to give him a few moments to describe how the FEC allows foreign corporate special interest interference to provide interference in local elections, particularly on public health matters that have occurred in the state of Montana. So, Durf, thanks for being here, and the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Representative Morelle, and thank you for inviting me today. I'm honored. Honorable members of Congress, again, my name is Durf Johnson. I'm the Deputy Director of the Montana Environmental Information Center, and I'm here to tell a little bit of a story about some real-world impacts, both with Citizens United as well as the broader deregulation of the FEC and the extremely harmful impacts to people across this nation, and in particular in my home state of Montana. As a native Montanan, and like many others, I hold a common sentiment of valuing and caring for the land. Montana is home to the first national park. It's a place where we still have the same flora and fauna that existed at the time of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And it's the setting for a river runs through it, where the famous words are, there's no clear line between religion and fly fishing. Montana's landscape, our waters and our forests and our mountains are clearly the identity of our state. And I'd like to think that we do go above and beyond in trying to protect that place, both to protect our heritage as well as to protect our economy. Unfortunately, since territorial days, Montana has suffered from what I call political exploitation and corruption, owing in large part to an immense mineral wealth that we have in the state. And that has resulted in a lot of corporate profiteering. What we call this sort of corporate stranglehold at the turn of the century is the copper collar. And Butte's copper barons exerted an enormous amount of political control over our economy and our politics. They bought a U.S. Senate office. In 1912, Montana reacted to this by passing what we called the Corrupt Practices Act, which was a prohibition on corporate expenditures in our election system. And that law remained intact for well over a century until the Citizens United decision ultimately voided that. Today, and especially today, there's an unwarranted amount of political or corporate influence in our politics. And a lot of that's due to our small population and our relatively cheap media market. And so we have a lot of corporate participation in our elections. Over the years, Montana has also had a really unfortunate relationship with hard rock mining. Many of you have probably heard about the Berkeley Pit, which is the largest Superfund site in the nation as it travels down the Clark Fork River. Or a more recent example would be Montana Tunnels just south of my home, which is now a recently defunct mine, over $20 million under bonded in bankruptcy and responsible for obliterating a trout stream. And these examples are sort of pockmarked across our state. And so due to that history, Montanans are very skeptical of mining proposals, and it's a very contentious aspect of our politics. Mining has to contend with certain safeguards in our state, and the most notable being that we have in our Montana Constitution an explicit right to a clean and healthful environment. And that right often helps to dictate our permitting process. And we, of course, like many other states, also have in our Constitution a ballot initiative process. We have these provisions in part to protect places like the Smith River, which is a really important place in Montana. It's Montana's only permitted recreational river. It flows 59 miles through a pretty majestic limestone canyon without any public access points, and it's an absolutely coveted permit to get. In 2025, just this month, an economic report came out that said that economic activity in floating that river resulted approximately $23 million for our state economy, and that's significant in a state with just a little over 1 million people. Unfortunately, in 2015, an Australian mining corporation proposed a hard rock mine at the headwaters directly underneath and adjacent to the most important tributary of the Smith. And since that time, I've been working in a coalition that's been fighting that mine ever since. And it's against sort of this backdrop that we worked to try and pass I-186, which was a Montana ballot initiative. And that ballot initiative would have prevented what we call perpetual pollution, acid mine drainage, which is the result of mining when you expose sulfide ore to air and water. And it's been really the death sentence for a lot of rivers and streams in Montana. It impacts the aquatic life, and it basically devoids them of life. Picture behind me is of acid mine drainage resulting from the Zortman-Landusky mine site just at the headwaters of the Fort Belknap Indian community, one of their water sources, and this pollution is leaking down into their teepee grounds at this point. It is a poster child for problems in the mining industry. And so this ballot initiative would have addressed both these historic wrongs as well as required more stringent standards to prevent this type of activity. Sandfire, unfortunately, the company that was proposing the mine at the headwaters of the Smith, took a great deal of interest in this ballot initiative because their proposal was in what you call a massive sulfide zone, which it really is the precursor to acid mine drainage. And so this company took $285,000 of Treasury dollars from Australia and injected it into this Montana ballot initiative. And as you can imagine, this raised some real concerns for us. If we can have foreign corporations contributing to ballot initiatives, local ballot initiatives in Montana, what's the universe of funding that we're going to have to fight against? And why should they be able to do it? And so we filed a FEC complaint in October of 2018 based on those concerns. And what we thought was black letter law on campaign finance, which barred citizens from foreign citizens from participating in our election system. The complaint was dismissed by a majority of the FEC, and commenting on that dismissal, a commissioner expressed her alarm at her colleagues voting to allow such foreign interference in American political life, noting that a company based halfway around the world made a sizable donation interjecting itself in hopes of future profits into a political debate in Montana over mining and the quality of Montana's waters. Balancing the economic and environmental concerns reflected in the ballot measure and uniquely affecting the state's residents is precisely the type of exercise of democratic self-government that should be protected from foreign influence. So since Citizens United and the deregulation of our election system, the universe of money funding elections in Montana is now much broader, and those interests and those monies often serve far-flung interests from the concern of everyday Montanans, and those interests don't need to necessarily drink our water and breathe our air and participate in our democracy in Montana. And so with that, it is beyond past time to overturn Citizens United and restore integrity into our election system. Thank you for having me today.
Sir, thank you for being here. I want to acknowledge our friend and colleague, the lady from Maryland who's going to stay. Thank you for being here. I think what I'd like to do now is people may have questions or comments, and I just want to open it up. And the distinguished gentleman from Worcester.
You pronounced it correctly. Good. Look, I think it'll be clear that the Trump administration will probably be the most corrupt and transactional administration in U.S. history. I mean, they're showing us who they are already. We saw who was at the, I think it was on. Okay, yeah, we saw who was front and center at the inauguration. But here's what's bothering me: that will further contribute to people believing that government doesn't matter in their lives. And one of the most shocking things of this last election was not just that Trump managed to get the most votes, but the number of people who were registered to vote who did not vote because they thought it didn't matter in their lives. And this is, one of the terrible things about Citizens United and all this dark money getting into campaigns is people feel that they're powerless, that they have no hope. And I think we need to figure out ways to talk about this that's connecting better. I don't think we should ever use the word oligarchy because I don't think people know what that means. And I think we have to have a campaign and a strategy to tie the influence of big money and to tie Citizens United into everything. If you're on a committee that deals with health care, I mean, to tie it to the fact that Trump is trying to undo efforts to lower the cost of pharmaceuticals. If you're on an environmental committee, talk about the stuff that we just heard about. I mean, but we have to keep on making the connection. And I'm just curious. I mean, we're going to reintroduce some bills, but I think we got to do more than that, right? We have to have a strategy so that we're all talking about this on whatever committee we're on, and any help on messaging and strategy would be much appreciated.
Well, thanks. I will note, last year we did a number of dinners on and democracy series, we called it. We talked about reproductive rights and democracy. We talked about gun laws and democracy and how the dark money influence. But I think you're right. We need to keep thinking about this is really sort of foundational and fundamental. So I don't know if our panelists want to comment.
I would just say that we are going to be engaging in lots of in-depth research and messaging testing as we move forward. We have also done a lot of that over the past 8 years and are happy to share it. And I think you're right. We have to have this steady drumbeat and narrative. And yes, it is legislative bills and ideas, but it's also how do we bring the story back to everyday Americans? How do we talk about the real life examples? And we are happy to help be a partner in that and happy to help identify opportunities. And of course, we will keep sharing all of the research and messaging.
Yeah, and I will add, likewise with Common Cause, I think one of the things that we need to remind ourselves of is that stories work. People love to hear stories, and people like to tell their stories. And so just as we try to build a record around voting rights, and when we see violations, we need to be having that record that we're building, and we're happy to be helping with building that record, but also thinking about how we're connecting those stories back in your home districts with your local elected leaders. I think one of the things that we often don't do is make sure that we're doing those state-federal conversations as much as we possibly can. And so whether they're hearings in the fields, whether there's town halls, and even things that Common Cause can do to help support in being able to have those listening sessions and bringing people through Zoom or in any other way that we can, we want to make sure that we're getting their stories out in their own words, because guess what? The voters are the best messengers on this. And so I'm happy to be able to support with that.
I have Ms. Ramirez, Ms. Johnson, the newest member of the Committee on House Administration, and Ms. Lee in that order, and anyone else who wants to. Ms. Ramirez, did I miss? Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you again for this conversation. Tiffany, after we finished, I got to the side and wondered why don't I have tequila in this coffee? Because,
I'll share that with you.
It feels bad. It feels terrible. It all feels awful. And it's exactly why we're here. It's exactly why so many of us are here saying we have to do everything we can to make sure that people understand the impact every day on money and politics. The reason that that senior has to figure out how they're going to be able to cover their Medicare supplemental or why they can't get the surgery they need, right, and get it approved is because of the influence that insurances have, right, the insurance industry has in lobbying, and the list goes on. So I have a couple questions for you, for all of you. What was the average cost of a congressional primary in 2024? Do we have a sense of that? We know we had the most expensive primaries in U.S. history this last 2024. What does it cost if someone in my neighborhood wanted to run for Congress? What would it actually cost these days?
First of all, we would discourage that. But
Unless maybe I'm running for something else. No, I'm kidding. I am not running for anything else. But what would the cost be? I think it was like in the 20 millions, the most expensive this last election. What's the average, you would say?
It was, but my guess is that the average for primaries is still probably down around 2 million, which is not insubstantial. We have seen the cost of competitive congressional races over the last, particularly 8 years, really increase. It used to be that a competitive congressional was about 5 million. I think many of you would tell me how much more expensive it is today, but it's much closer to the $15 million mark. And what we've seen is also just the increase in the outside spending on that. Prior to Citizens United, I know one more stat, 75% of the spending in congressional races or Senate races was controlled by the candidate. In competitive races now, 75% of the spending is now controlled by outside sources, 75. Right? Which also means you all can't get out your message and talk to the voters. The one other thing I would say is that all too often we know the first two questions that anyone has asked is, how much can you raise? And what network of wealthy folks are you bringing with you? And that's not how we should be basing who our representatives are.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I am curious, and I'm going to have my staff just give me a little average on primary and generals, because of course we know they're significantly more expensive. But let me wrap up in saying this. Yesterday morning at 7 a.m. in Chicago, it was 25 degrees colder than it was here in D.C., and I was out there talking to people about their rights. Most people know I'm daughter of immigrants. I'm the very first Latina in the entire Midwest ever to serve in Congress, and it's 2025. Why is that? It's too damn expensive to run for Congress. And it's also really difficult to stay here and focus when you're spending so much time on call time. But I remember talking to this guy who I just said, I just want to make sure you have a flyer and you know your rights. He pulled out his wallet and said, I have papers, I have an employment authorization, please don't deport me. I spent a couple minutes just talking to him and talking about what my stance are and how my mother crossed the border pregnant with me, and I will defend immigrants and their rights and their constitutional rights that they currently still have. And then I had a number of them just come around me at the train station. They saw themselves in me. They saw their sisters, they saw their cousins. So I do think that, to your point, Virginia and Tiffany, we have to be able to tell the stories about why it's so important that people like me are serving in Congress and how we get more of us in Congress if we want people on the doors to feel like their members of Congress relate to them. And I think that what our Chairman McGovern, of Future of the Rules Committee Chairman, said, it was really important. How do we actually break it down for people to understand the impact it's having when the image that most of us have is what we saw yesterday at that inauguration? And I say that to you because I want to be, and I'm generally optimistic, but it's hard for me to believe that we'll be able to move some of the bills that we know we have to pass in both chambers in a moment right now where you see so many people on both sides, right, concerned about if we do pass it, what does that mean for my own election? So I am really interested in the messaging strategy that you think we could be working on that builds up for us to be able to move it, hopefully in the next term when we have the majority.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Johnson, Ms. Lee, and then Ms. Bayland.
Thank you. And I do hope I get to call you Mr. Chairman as a member of our committee soon. I have a countdown app, and it's like 700 days or something. So I want to, every time I have an opportunity, I'm going to highlight this. Everyone on your panel, and most of the people in our everybody in the Democrats Healing Their Wounds say, we got basically our ass handed to us on comms and communication. We have to do a better job communicating. But then, and everybody says that, but then I don't hear the next step down of what are we going to do to better communicate specifically. And in a Democratic chat that we had today even, I was like, what is the caucus doing to help us with op-eds that we can all send out, that we can all then also send to our state representatives and state legislators who are under us, who are all on the same message? So my challenge to you, and what I've also learned in being in Congress now for 10 days, is that we are hooked up to the plow at every moment of every day. So to expect each member of Congress to generate their own brilliant messaging on the vast array of topics that just came down on executive orders yesterday is unrealistic. And that is why it's not happening. You know, and so what we need from you guys is to be spoon-fed like kindergartners on information that we can then turn over to our staff that can then put it out. But there, to me, the biggest, because you have brilliant facts, you have brilliant information, you know, that we don't have. But if your office sent around, for example, on even once a quarter, an article, a post, a podcast that you did that was brilliant, that we can amplify, that an op-ed that we can maybe massage into some of our own language or just send, and where we could have a unified message throughout the next 700 days on these issues, then it might actually break through. Democrats, we represent 175 million people that we have the right, the bandwidth to communicate to easily. But we're just not doing it, and we're not doing it in a concerted way to where it breaks through. Because if you have 215 members of Congress translating that down to various state legislatures, we're all saying the same thing about the same thing, then it might get somewhere. And so that's just my comment is I would love to promote, but I don't have time to go in and research everything you just told me and generate my own stuff. I need some help, and I would like to encourage you all to do that at that next level down.
I love it. And you know my podcasts and my facts are the best, for sure. I love the feedback and absolutely agree. I have been on the Hill and I understand what just kind of drinking from the fire hose it can be. For a very practical thing, today is the 15th anniversary, so each of your offices has received a toolkit with messaging, with talking points, with facts, with social media, with graphics, with video, with op-ed. So plug and play, and we will make sure to get you lots more things like that.
And I would also just say that we can proactively put out more messaging support for you as well. One thing I would say, though, and I think this is a criticism that is fair and among friends here, when you were talking about the messaging challenges, I think one of the things, it's not always just op-eds though, those bite-sized, easily digestible pieces of information, the language that we use, just as quickly as possible, being able to get it out and repeat, because that is what your opposition has done. They have been able to get things out in such a short, succinct way that it's landed with people because it just stays in their mind. And so I think that's an area where we can also support.
Yep. Great all the way around. Ms. Lee, Ms. Balin, and Ms. McBride.
Thank you, Mr. Future Chair. In the fear of being combative, I prefer to be honest. I just want to first say that, when I first came to Congress, I was the poster child for outside spending in congressional primaries. And while I don't hold that distinction this cycle, hopefully longer than this cycle, it's still something that is incredibly important to me, and for various reasons that I do want to get at. The first thing that I want to say is that, just to respond to some of the points that have been made, when we talk about messaging, I want to be very frank. I don't believe that the Democratic Party has a messaging problem, first and foremost, and that we're now, an hour and a half into this, and we're still saying, first and foremost, that we have a messaging problem. No, we have an action problem. We cannot message appropriately until we are all on one accord. And the reality is that even Democrats are not all on one accord when it comes to getting dark money out of our politics. And while we may say very publicly that we want to end Citizens United, our actions don't align with our communications. So what's actually more important is that our actions align with our communications. And sometimes the best way that you can communicate is through your actions. We've had multiple opportunities, and right now, as we look at the challenge around the DNC, one of the things that comes up often with the DNC is putting into the platform banning outside money in Democratic primaries. It's not to say that we would ban it in, general elections, which is the concern that everybody has, that we can't unilaterally disarm. But in our Democratic parties, we won't even get rid of money in politics there when it's just us. And we have to start to talk about the why that is. As a black woman, similar to Delia, I am the first black woman to represent Pennsylvania. I do not come from money. I come from the Mon Valley, where I'm incredibly proud to have been born and raised. There is no one in my network and my phone who I can call and ask for an obscene amount of money. And because there's no such person in my network, there's no such person in the networks of the people for whom are in my network, which means that people like me are systematically blocked from representing us in Congress. And when we think about who the best communicators around things are, it's oftentimes the people who have the most lived experience, the people who have lived out the policy impacts that we've heard so many people talk about. So when I talk about money in politics, I might not always start with, well, we have an oligarchy, but I will say, Jim, we do. And we can talk about what we need to call things, but the reality is that we need to tell the truth. And if people don't understand the language we're using, it doesn't mean that we don't tell it to them. It means that we have to get them up to speed on the language. But when I think about the people who were impacted this election cycle, the easiest races to target are black and brown people and poor and working class people. It is hardest for them to access the halls of power, not just as representatives, But as citizens, as constituents, as advocates, as activists, as lobbyists, you rarely see black and brown people here, which means that you rarely see the issues that impact them on our ballots. You rarely see them in the docket. You rarely, if ever, see them coming up for a vote. But you do often see them on the chopping block when it comes time to negotiate the budget or the debt ceiling bill. When I think about the people who were blocked from serving in Congress, or the people who couldn't step up into Congress in the first place, we're talking about nurses and school teachers, we're talking about people who represented different perspectives that have never been here, but they've been blocked out because the reality is that we can't come up with $15 million. It's black and brown people who are going to be most and hardest impacted by this, and not just as representatives, because I think that sometimes you think, well, this is a self-interested argument that we're making. Well, you want black people to be able to be represented. No, I want us to also be able to be served appropriately. We want to make sure that our issues are served. So when we think about why we can't get a lot of our democratic values or projects or ideas across the finish line, is because we're all starting from point B, point C, and not point A. So if you care about money in politics, or excuse me, if you care about ending gun violence, if you care about mass shootings in our schools, at our concerts, and our places of worship, then you should care about money in politics. If you care about the climate, if you care about environmental racism, if you care about taking down big pharma, if you care about any of these incredible issues that are so important to us, then you need to first care about money in politics. And if we can't put our money where our mouth is, then we have to be very real about whether or not we are actually fighting for the best interests of the American people. We know what we need to combat lowering prescription drug costs or raising them in an executive order. We need to combat big pharma. We can't combat big pharma if we are also accepting money from them, or if other people who are in the arena with us can accept it. So Democrats have to be more serious about serving the people, and we can't do that if we are not serious about combating our own issues with taking money in politics. I only have one question for anyone. Does anyone know who the biggest outside spender was in the 2024 election cycle? I have a guess, but I want to be sure.
I think it was Elon Musk.
Okay, I thought it was big. I thought it was crypto. Which might be quite close.
It might be. I thought he did 275 million, and I didn't think they hit quite that much. But
That's
I
a
can find
lot
out
of
for you.
money.
It's
That's a
so
lot of money
much.
for the guy who is sitting right behind the President of the United States of America. Right now, we have big spenders who are promising to come back into our primaries. And they'll use terms like liberal or progressive or moderate. We're protecting moderates, but what they're actually protecting are their own business interests. If you peel back one layer, and I will say it, if you peel back one layer behind AIPAC, one layer behind crypto, one layer behind big pharma, one layer behind natural gas, you'll find the very people who are also behind the capturing of our Supreme Court. You'll find the very people who are also behind getting and elevated Donald Trump and everybody else. So it's important that as Democrats that we combat this with the language, the same language, and with courage. And that courage has to first start looking in the mirror before we can look outward. So yes, we're going to spend the next 4 to maybe 20 years talking about MAGA. We're going to talk about fascism and oligarchy. But we have to also talk about ourselves and the role that we play in facilitating it or ending it. And we can end it by being on one accord on getting money out of politics.
May I respond to you real quickly? Because, no, I appreciate that, and I think it is important, especially when you are in this space. And it's not impossible. I live in the state of Maryland. Senator Angela Alsobrooks, who was also my county executive prior to being the senator, her primary, the amount of money that her primary opponent spent was unbelievable. I think it was somewhere of $60 million. It was a ridiculous amount of money. And she was able to win by having a good ground game and a strong organizing strategy. So it costs money. It does cost money, but it wasn't $60 million that she spent. And I think the point is that you can win through good old organizing and old-fashioned campaigning still. And so I appreciate your comment.
Ms. Balin. Thank you, thank you. Any other comments or questions? I said I'd keep this to an hour, so I, sure, of course. Who would stop you?
I agree with almost everything you said. And, you know, and I think we need to do more as a party to show that we're serious about this, and it's not just a talking point. And we work with, and to this agenda, I don't take corporate PAC money. You know, I don't take money from fossil fuel interests. But I mean, I'm in a position where, you know, I'm relatively confident I can try to get by without it. But some people are in races where a ton of money is being thrown at them, and it's more difficult to do that. But to the extent that some of us can actually make some of these pledges, you know, then it might become contagious, and other people feel comfortable doing it. So I do think there's a case to be made that as a party, that there's more that we need to do. But I think as individuals, we can all take certain actions on our own and hopefully, you know, amplify the message that, again, I don't want people to question why I'm voting the way I am. I don't want them to think that I'm voting because I'm getting a lot of money from the pharmaceutical companies or whatever. So, in any event, I just point that out.
Well, let me close, first of all, by thanking Virginia and Tiffany and Durf for being here and for your leadership and all the work you do. And I will say the one difference between optimism, someone said it's hard to be optimistic. There's a difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is just this sort of blind faith. Hope is personal agency, and you can do something about it. And I think what's great about this is we can hope because we can all do something to make this difference. So thank you all for being here. God bless. It's really a meat locker.
Tiffany, that was impressive.
Oh, thank you. You were great. And also, you know that.
It takes a radiator. All right, I'll talk to you.
Yeah.
Let me know. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have said before, I will say again, Montana is one of my favorite places, and we've worked closely with